Garry Kasparov returned to the chessboard to play in a Fischer Random tournament in St. Louis. So Fischer Random, of course, is where you shuffle the pieces on the baseline. It's drawn by lots, the position you're going to play. And, well, Fischer Random is one name for this kind of chess. Chess 960 is another name. But in St. Louis, they like to call it Chess 9LX. In my opinion, a really ugly acronym. Particularly when there are good names for this game already. Anyway, it's great to see another tournament with Fischer Random. And fantastic to see Garry Kasparov taking part. You know, it's a very generous act on his part, playing against much younger and sharper players, and he knows he's just not match fit. He has nothing to gain. So I think it's great that he was playing. So he started incredibly well. He beat Wesley So in the first round, drew with Hikaru Nakamura, and this was game 3. He has black against Ray Robson. So here's the position that was drawn. Not so random actually, because you can see the bishops are on their normal starting positions. The knights are slightly oddly placed in the corner. Let's see how it works out. And of course, castling is a very important rule in Fischer Random. We'll see some examples of how that works out. D4 looks like a pretty good start because it frees that bishop. Knight G6. Yes, you've got to watch out for that queen actually. That could come into the game if that pawn moves. Knight G3. So Robson follows suit. Of course, Ray Robson, he's sort of on the edge of 2700, 28 years old. Not a bad player. C3, there you are. That allows the queen into the game, and who knows, maybe the knight coming through on this square as well. And Kasparov follows suit. So it's a symmetrical position so far. Now things start to take a very interesting turn. H4. So if that's taken, then the queen swoops down and that wins instantly with simple double attack. Kasparov blocks that one, and yeah, there's the same issue. Knight takes, then the queen comes down, and actually the rook is trapped. It's a very interesting position. So bishop g5 protects that pawn, and yeah, slightly impedes black because the pawn can't advance now. And of course f6 is impossible because the queen can take the knight. And Kasparov shifts that knight over. And e3, that could be useful to bring this bishop into the game somewhere. And knight e6, so Kasparov is tackling this bishop which is somewhat out on a limb on g5. And this becomes very complicated, and this is certainly, you could say, a non-standard position. Bishop d3 attacking that knight, and that's pretty awkward. You know, if the knight drops back, you've got a very strange situation where bishop h7 actually wins that rook. It's really peculiar. Let me just show that. I mean, that's apart from the fact that this pawn... Oh, no, that can't be taken. But this is a winning move. Not that you want to move the knight back into the corner anyway. Knight takes and pawn takes. This knight is threatened, so queen d6. So that protects the knight. And also, it means that if this bishop moves, then the king can leap over the rook and castle. That's one of the rules in Fischer Random, that you do have to get the bishops out first before you have to clear the pieces out before you castle. And I think this is a very important moment in the game. So I'd like you to have a think. How would you play with white? White to play. We've only played 8 moves, and yet we're at I think, a critical juncture in the game. White to play. What would you do next? Cheers. I'll have a I'll have a drink. I think I need a drink. my croaky voice, and you have a think. White to play. Well, Ray Robson plays bishop f5, and I think that's a bit cautious. You could say it's logical to exchange off, one of those two bishops. But I think the most testing move is to exchange on g6. Now you don't want to allow black to break like this. So f4, that protects the pawn and gives a very nice pawn chain, clamps black. Black can't play e5 very easily. I think this is a very difficult position to assess. Important to bring this bishop outside the pawn chain. So for example, h4 and then bishop f5. I mean, this is an absolutely splendid piece. But this bishop is not so great because it's shut out by the pawn chain. I think this is a very difficult position to assess. The king castles. There we are. That's a good example of Fischer random castling. But if this knight were able to come over here and perhaps get some pressure on that h-pawn, the king is pretty safe on f2. How is black getting counterplay here? I think you've got to go for c5 to try and perhaps get this bishop into the game, but I prefer white here. This bishop is tremendous, but this looks loose to me. I think white should go for bishop takes knight, but bishop f5 played by Ray Robson. h4 pushes the knight back, and Kasparov exchanged on f5 and pushed the queen back a square, and then went for e5. And the position is starting to normalize a little bit now. I mean, this rook looks oddly placed here. This knight looks a bit strange, but everything else is starting to look normal, and it starts to look as though Kasparov is doing quite well. He has some control in the center, a little bit more space in the center. White is very solid. That's the only thing. This is a really solid pawn chain. But yeah, Kasparov has some central control like this. And with his next move, Robson really raises the stakes. He plays f4. This could be very dangerous with this pawn advancing, pushing the knight away. So it's an ambitious move. Kasparov exchanges. If white were able to play f5, pushing the knight away, and you can simply take this pawn. And at the moment, black's king is rather stuck in the middle. So this is highly dangerous. I can understand why Robson was attracted to this continuation. However, Kasparov now found an excellent move. What did Kasparov play next? Black to play. Here's your next turn to match Garry Kasparov. Black to play. Well, the previous one you were trying to find a move from white, but now you've got to find a move from black. Queen d7 is an excellent move. Well, Robson went into the endgame, but for example, if f5, then we can see one of the points of Queen d7, which is to enable queenside castling. So pawn takes knight impossible, there's a pin there. And with the king relatively safe on the queen side, well, yeah, white's king is sort of not so safe. That might castle queenside, it's hard to say. But basically there's not going to be a big attack. Maybe this knight is going to come back here to e7. There could be some pressure. I mean, it's still quite double-edged, but black should be all right there. But Robson exchanged on d7. And then he pushed with f5 and knight e7 and castles kingside. So these pawns are very far advanced, but that in fact they're rather overextended, and this position is simply better for black because of the weaknesses on the e-file. So rook e8 is an excellent move. All these squares are weak. If that pawn were back on f2, in fact, I think this would be a far better position. But with the pawn advanced, see, every pawn advanced creates a weakness. These squares are all weak, and the knight isn't well placed on e2 either. So it came to c1, so Robson is looking to bounce that round, looking at these outposts. And now Kasparov plays excellently. Knight c8. He goes into overdrive here. So this knight wants to come here. Maybe c4. d6 is a beautiful square. Can you get there straight away? Well, you don't really want to allow that knight into e5 here. So bishop d6, good move. If the knight checks here, the king just steps to the side. So knight b3, this one finally comes into the game, and b6. So this is classic strategy when you're playing against the knights. You want to restrict their activity. So c5 is covered, e5 is covered with this one. So this knight redeploys, it's not going anywhere, knight d2. And another excellent move from Kasparov, f6. So you can see those squares are securely covered, those knights are not going to get anywhere. But this is really nice because it fixes that pawn on f5, and this could well be a weakness later on. If there's an exchange, then that rook comes into the game beautifully. So f6 creates a real dilemma for white. Both these pawns are vulnerable. Knight f3 covers the pawn on g5, and bishop g3. Once Kasparov makes this move, then I think it's absolutely clear who is better. Black is better. That bishop feels like it's stronger than both knights, actually. Protects the h-pawn. It covers e1. That's the crucial thing about the move. So black gains control over the e-file. That rook cannot be challenged. And positionally, this is simply winning for black already, because these knights are useless. They can't find a good outpost, and the rook is going to invade on the e-file. And these pawns are vulnerable. And now that the bishop has vacated d6, then the knight is going to hop back in there, looking at all these beautiful points in the position. Okay, let's see how it works out. Knight f2. That knight is spinning around, trying to find a decent square. Knight d6 hits this one. Knight g4. Okay, that's Robson's idea. He wants to attack the pawn on f6 and get counterplay. But the knight gets pushed back really easily. Attacking the knight. Knight comes back to f2. Rook e2, very nice. So it looks along the 7th rank. So it's simply threatening to take here. And this one is in black sights as well. Knight g4 comes back again. Well, Robson would very much like a draw here if Kasparov came back, but no, there's no need for that. Knight e4, excellent move. Covers f6 and looks at these squares as well. So, white doesn't have a chance to play rook d2 to cover. So rook b1 protects the pawn here. And king d6, that's a very calm move from Kasparov. I mean, he would like to take here, but it does allow a check. I mean, not that that's fatal or even that great for white, but there's kind of no need to rush things. I really like king d6 because this pawn is not running on g5, is not running away. If white exchanges, that makes the situation even worse because that rook is going to crash through on the g-file. So basically, you just leave white to sweat. There's nothing white can do. It's the worst kind of situation to be in because black's advantages are permanent. That bishop, what a beautiful piece. That knight on the outpost, the rook on the second rank, and let's see what happens to this rook. Rook fd1, and in this case, Kasparov takes. King f1, rook c2, and rook d3. Well, if white exchanged rooks, then rook f8 just picks that one up. That's 2 pawns. 2 pawns up for black. Rook d3, rook f8 anyway. Rook f2. So Robson has managed to cover that pawn, but there's a breakthrough here. h3. Very nasty. So if pawn takes, then you can take the knight. And c4, rook h8. So this rook comes into the game as well. This is just fantastic for black. Total domination by Kasparov. h2. And rook takes knight. Wasn't quite the end of the game. Well, if pawn takes, then that knight hops in for a fork. Knight check, king takes, rook takes rook, and king takes knight. And here Robson resigned. Kasparov has knight and bishop against a rook. Knight f2 check is threatened. Let's say rook here. Then, well, you can do anything you like really, but bishop d6 is pretty good with the idea knight g3 check. But you don't even need to rush it. I quite like this. g4. And then let's just pop the king back here where it can't be touched. And then, you know, you can decide what to do next. You know, you might put the bishop back, maybe g3 and then knight f2 check. I mean, of course, it's completely winning. Black is going to win more material. Well, what a smooth performance from Kasparov. I think from this moment on, once he found queen d7, then he found his feet in the game, and this endgame was a tour de force from Garry Kasparov. He just rolled Robson away, starting with this excellent maneuver, bringing the knight to c8, and eventually it came in here. Great stuff. Things didn't go so smoothly for Kasparov, but after this game, nevertheless, you know, he had started with 2.5 out of 3, and he, you know, against absolute top players, very, very impressive. Perhaps I'll show you perhaps another game from this tournament, because I think it's very, very interesting indeed to see Fischer Random in action. Thanks for watching.